Be'ezras Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today a new set of laws. Hilchos, Avodas, Hakippurim, the laws of the service of Yom Kippur. This is not the regular laws about Yom Kippur, which we already had in the Rambam's third book, the personal observances of Yom Kippur, that we have to fast, and all the other abstentions that we have to make on Yom Kippur. This is, as part of the book of Avodah, of the temple service, this is a set of laws dedicated to describing the special temple service that would go on Yom Kippur. Avodas, the Avodah in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash of Yom Hakippurim. And as the Rambam always does, he begins by telling us which mitzvahs of the 613 are going to be discussed here. And unlike in the past sets of laws which covered multiple mitzvahs, this one is only mitzvah sasei achas. It's one positive commandment. Vihi, which is sheyaseh, or sheyaseh, maaseh Yom Hakippurim kulay, that the procedure, the service of Yom Kippur should be entirely done al haseder k'moshe kasuv b'parshas Achrei Mos, exactly in the order as it's written in the Torah in the portion called Achrei Mos, which we in fact read even today on Yom Kippur. That's the Torah reading. We read the service, we recount how the service used to be done, and it has to be followed in the precise order. HaKarbanos, all the sacrifices, v'haviduyin, and the confessions, v'shiluach hasoyer, sending away the goat, which was a special procedure which we'll see later on in the laws. Ushara avodas, and all the other services had to exactly be done in the way prescribed by the Torah. Ubir mitzvah zu b'prakim elu, the explanation of this mitzvah is coming in the following 5 chapters, God willing. Perek Rishon, chapter 1. The Rambam begins by giving a general outline of what's going to happen, service speaking, in the context of the sacrifices on Yom Kippur, and also begins to tell us what would go on in preparation to Yom Kippur, the 7 days before, and the night of Yom Kippur. So the Rambam begins, halacha aleph b'yom hatzoim, on the day of the fast. That's Yom Kippur, of course, which is curious because the Rambam just called it Yom Hakippurim, so why not just say b'yom Hakippurim? Why say b'yom hatzoim? So the Rebbe once said the Rambam is a halacha book, and so right away at the first opportunity where he could bring out something related to halacha, he does so. So if you call it Yom Kippur means the Day of Atonement. But we don't do atonement, Hashem does the atonement. So there's no halachic element to calling it Yom Kippur. But fasting, that's what we do, that's a halachic thing. So right away the Rambam calls it, this is the day which halacha says that we should fast. So it's a halachic name more than a conceptual name. Anyway, on this fast day, on this day of Yom Kippur, makrivin tamid b'shachar b'tamid bein ha'arbayim keseder kol yom v'yom. So first of all, like every day in the temple, they bring the carbon tamid, the daily sacrifice in the morning, and in the afternoon, Yom Kippur was no different. It just had additional sacrifices. Umakrivin musaf hayoim, for the musaf of the day, every holiday gets a carbon musaf. So for the carbon musaf, the communal carbon musaf, there was par va'ayil v'shiva kvasim kulam oilois, there was a bull and a ram and 7 sheep, which were all brought as burnt offerings, useir chatas, and there was also a goat as a sin offering. Nasa b'chutz, which was performed outside in the temple courtyard, as usually was a sin offering done. And it was eaten by the Kohanim in the evening. Of course, you couldn't eat it by day because it's Yom Kippur, you have to fast, but you eat it that night. So you have the 2 sheep of the carbon tamid, the bull, the ram, and the 7 sheep, and the goat of the carbon musaf. Then, v'oid makrivin yeser al musaf zeh, says the Rambam, furthermore, there was sacrifices offered. Over and above the communal carbon musaf, there was also special sacrifices for the Kohen Gadol on his own behalf, the high priest. There would be a par ben bakar lechatas, v'hu nisraf, a bull, a young bull, as a sin offering which was burnt. V'ayil la'oila, and there was a ram as a burnt offering also. U'shneim mishal Kohen Gadol, both had to come from the funds of the high priest himself. He would pay for these sacrifices. Now says the Rambam, if you're expert in the Torah, you're going to right away know that there's actually what seems to be a 3rd ram mentioned in the context of Yom Kippur. So far we have a ram as part of the Korban Musaf, then we have a ram for the Kohen Gadol. But then if you look in the Torah, it says, right in the beginning of Parshas Achrei Mos, when it talks about Yom Kippur, it says, Me'es hadas b'nei Yisrael. From the Jewish people, they should take 2 goats, ve'ayil echad la'oila, and 1 ram as a burnt offering. That seems to be a 3rd ram. Says the Rambam, you should know that's not a 3rd ram. Ve'ayil haba mishel tzibur, ha'amur b'parshas Achrei Mos. The ram that's supposed to come from communal funds, mentioned in the portion of Achrei Mos, hu ha'ayil ha'amur b'chumash hapkudim b'chlal ha'musaf. It's the same ram that's mentioned in the book of Numbers. Chumash Hakippurim is another term for Chumash Bamidbar, amongst the Musaf sacrifices, where it says in Pashtas Pinchas, Uva Asher Lachedesh Hashvi Hazeh, on the 10th of the 7th month, you bring a Musaf. Among the Musaf was an Ayil Echad, 1 ram. So this Ayil Echad and this Ayil Echad is the same thing. It's not a 3rd ram, it's a repeat of the 2nd ram. It's also called the ram of the people. In contrast to the ram of the Kohen Gadol, this is the ram of the people. Then furthermore, over and above the bull and the ram of the Kohen Gadol, Mevin, Mishel Tzibur, we also bring from the community Shnei Seirei Izim, 2 additional goats, that's these 2 goats in the pasuk here, Shnei Seirei Izim Lechatos, Echad Karev Chatos V'hu Nisraf, one of them is offered as a sin offering, but not like the regular sin offerings which were performed outside. This one is actually the procedures were performed inside the temple, and it was burnt, it wasn't eaten. And then V'hasheni Soira Mishtaleach, the second one was not even offered, it was sent away. As we'll learn, it was pushed off a cliff. It was part of the atonement procedure for the Jewish people. So we've listed now 16 animals that were in use in the temple on Yom Kippur, but one of them wasn't offered, it was sent away. So Nimtzu, it turns out, says the Rambam, Kol ha-behemais hakrevim b'yom zeh 15. All the animals which were offered on this day would be 15. Shnei Tmidin, the 2 daily sacrifices, the sheep. Upar u'shnei elim b'shiva kvasim, the bull. 2 rams, the ram of the community and the ram of the Kohen Gadol. And 7 sheep, kulan oilos. All of these animals were burnt offerings. Ushnei seirim chatos, 2 goats were offered as sin offerings. Echad nasa b'chutz v'nechal erev v'hasheni nasa b'fnim v'nisraf. One was performed outside, eaten in the evening. Second one was performed inside and burnt. Upar kohen gadol lechatos v'hu nisraf, and also the bull of the kohen gadol as a sin offering, which was also burnt. The Rabbi once asked, every word in the Rambam is precise. When he says nimtzu kol ha-behemais hakrevim, all the animals which were offered, it seems to be extra. You could just say, Nimtzu kol hakarbanos, all the sacrifices. We know sacrifices are animals. Why do you have to say all the animals that were offered on this day? And also, why give the number? Like we can't do the math ourselves. So the Rebbe said that this alludes mystically to the core, the heart of Yom Kippur. The heart of Yom Kippur is bridging the gap between the highest of the high and the lowest of the low. Of course, the service was done by the holiest person on the holiest day in the holiest place. And yet, that holiness had to penetrate even behemoths, even animals. The Rambam makes sure to call them animals to show that this service of Yom Kippur went down not only in the human kingdom, the animal inside us, and even the animal kingdom in the physical sense. So the Rambam uses the word behemoth to bring that out. And he uses the word 15, tells us 15, to allude to the fact that the first 2 letters of the divine name of Hashem, Yud Hey, are the gematria of 15. In Kabbalah, the Yud Hey is considered to be even higher realm than the Vav and the Hey. Again, showing that the Avodah of Yom Kippur is connected between the Yud Hey, the highest of the high, and Behemoth, the lowest of the low. At any rate, we have 15 animals that are offered for Yom Kippur. Halacha Beis, Avodas kol chamesh esrei behemoth elu. The service, the sacrificial procedure for all these 15 animals, hakrevin b'yom zeh, that are offered on this day, eina ela b'kohen gadol bilvad, was only performed by the kohen gadol himself. Nobody else. Had to be the high priest who would do it. He'd be the one to slaughter, he'd be the one to receive the blood, he'd be the one to sprinkle, he did everything. Echad kohen ha-mashiach b'shem ha-mishcha, oy ha-merubah bivgadim, doesn't matter how he became installed. Originally they used to have the actual anointing oil that was poured on the kohen gadol. Later on they would just put on the clothes, and that was the way you were inaugurated. Doesn't matter how he was inaugurated, but it has to be a high priest. The Imhoisa Shabbos, if it was a Shabbos day, as this year, Yom Kippur coming up in 5785, is going to be on Shabbos. Af Musaf Shabbos, Ein Makriv ala Kohen Gadol. Also, the special additional sacrifice for Shabbos, which was 2 more sheep, would also be offered only by the Kohen Gadol. And the Rambam adds even more. Not only the animal sacrifices have to be done by the high priest, but all the other services of this day, even the ones not intrinsically related to Yom Kippur, offering of the incense every day, not the special one in the Holy of Holies, the regular incense every day, and the lighting of the candles of the menorah, hakoil asui b'kohen gadol, all of it had to be done by a high priest, nasui, a high priest who was married. He had to be married to do the service on Yom Kippur. Shenemar, as it says, v'chiper ba'adayu va'ad beisai, he will achieve atonement for himself and for his house. The sages interpret, beisai zu ishtai. His house, this means his wife. So there has to be a wife in the picture in order for him to be able to do the service of the high priest on Yom Kippur. And the commentaries discuss at length the significance of this. Why does he have to be married? Of course, in general, the high priest is very limited who he can marry, but we don't find the rest of the year that he has to be married. Why on Yom Kippur does he have to be married? So the Rebbe has a whole talk on this where he examines 2 possible ways of looking at this. On the one hand, you can say that it's an extension of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, being the holiest day, demands that the person involved in the service be in a complete human state. Hashem said in the beginning of the Torah, it's not good for man to be alone. When he's married and there's a completion, now he can serve on Yom Kippur. The other way to look at it is that it's an extension of the Kohen Gadol. not so much the day, but the person. Being the person who's representing all of Jewish people on this day, he has to be in the most complete form, married. What's the nafkamina? What's the practical difference as to which way you look at it? The question would be, does it have to be only the services related to Yom Kippur, or even the other services? See, if it's an extension of Yom Kippur, then only the Yom Kippur services should require a married Kohen Gadol, but not the other services. What does the Rambam say? Even the other services have to be done by a married Kohen Gadol, which means that it's an extension of the Kohen Gadol. He, on this day, has to be married. And there's a much deeper significance to this concept of being married. And it's hinted in the word that the Torah uses. Torah calls the wife house. Why doesn't it just say, he should atone for himself and for his wife? So there's a very interesting passage in the Talmud where Rabbi Yossi once said that I never called my wife. I always called her my house. Which the ethical masters and the Kabbalists explained to me. What does it mean I only called her my house? That Rabbi Yossi saw in his wife her purpose. The purpose of raising of marriage in Torah context is to raise a family. And to have the woman be the mainstay of the home, where she guides the values and the principles and the spirit of the home. Calling one's wife house indicates being in tune with that divine purpose. And by the Torah calling the wife house on Yom Kippur, that means that the Kohen Gadol has to be in a space where when he looks at something, all he sees is its divine purpose. Nothing is an end in itself, but only a means to an end to achieving that which Hashem wants out of it. And when the Kohen Gadol arrives at that space where he sees the innate purpose in everything, now he's fit to serve on Yom Kippur. Everything on Yom Kippur, even the mundane things, become part of that service, in which you see the purpose hidden in every single thing. And now we move on to the laws that actually pertain to the days leading up to Yom Kippur. Halacha Gimel, Shivas Yamim Kodim Liyom Hakippurim, 7 days before Yom Kippur, Mafrishin Kohen Gadol Mi Beisai, we separate, we remove the high priest from his home, Lilishkasei Shabbat Mikdash, and we bring him to his chamber. There was a special chamber, the Lishkas Parhedrin, it was called, where the Kohen Gadol would live for 7 days before Yom Kippur. Actually, this was his private chamber all the time. He could be there whenever he wanted. But during these 7 days, he had to be there. He left his house and came here. This is a tradition received directly from Moshe Rabbeinu, the 7-day concept. Additionally, we separate him from his wife all these 7 days. No relations. Because, not because relations itself is a problematic here, but because if during relations his wife were to begin her menstrual cycle and become a nida, that would make the husband, the Kohen Gadol, impure for 7 days, and he won't be able to serve on Yom Kippur. So just to remove that possibility, we say no relations for those 7 days. Nevertheless, there's other ways that the Kohen Gadol could become disqualified. So we always prepare, we have at the ready a deputy Kohen Gadol, somebody ready to step in. So that if anything disqualifying happens to the high priest, this deputy will step in. And he'll step in any time. Whether the disqualifying thing happened to the high priest before the service began, before the morning daily sacrifice. Whether the disqualifying factor happened after he offered his sacrifice, the daily sacrifice. No matter when it happened, the deputy Kohen Gadol could step in. There's some discussion why the Rambam writes Achar shehikriv karbanai, after he offers his sacrifice. We're talking about the daily sacrifice. Why don't you say, Bein she'era b'pisol kaidem tamid shel shachar, bein she'era b'pisol achar shehikriv hatamid. Why does it say his sacrifice? By the way, some people want to insert the word zeh after the word karbanai. Achar shehikriv karbanai zeh, after he brings this sacrifice of his. In other words, this one meaning the one we just referred to, the karban tamid. But the Rebbe has a very novel approach to here, based on some manuscripts in the Rambam, where it should say not achar shehikriv karbanai, but achar shehikriv karban nois, after he offered all the sacrifices. Which means that whether the disqualifying factor happened way in the beginning of the day, or even if it happened at the very end of the day, after everything is done, in terms of the animal sacrifices, it doesn't matter. The deputy Kohen Gadol can step in, and whatever he's about to do will be considered enough of a service that will inaugurate him, as we'll see in a second. The Rambam immediately continues. He says, the deputy who steps in, he doesn't have to do any formal inauguration ceremony. The service itself inaugurates him, which now explains the novelty I just mentioned, that even though all the sacrifices have been offered, whatever remains in the day, let's say just as we'll see in chapter 4, there was a removal of the the incense pan from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that's also considered an avodah. It's not only the sacrifices that are considered service, anything else could also be considered service to inaugurate him. And he begins at the service where the first one stopped, which creates also an interesting discussion. As we'll see, there's a part of the service where the Kohen Gadol reads the Torah. So what if the first high priest becomes disqualified just before the reading of the Torah? So the next stage is not really an avodah. It's not really a service. How does that inaugurate him? So there's different ways to approach it. Either you can get someone else to do it, or we'll just say it's not called an avodah, so anybody can do it. Doesn't have to be the high priest. Or the Rabbi suggests possibly that they might push it off. In this case, they may push off the reading of the Torah to a later point, so he can first do a service which will inaugurate him, and then he'll read the Torah. Anyway, that's the way that it works when a deputy steps in. Avar Yom Hakippurim, what happens when Yom Kippur is done? The original high priest is still the high priest. The first one, the original Kohen Gadol, goes back to service. And the deputy moves off to the side. But since he was installed, even for a moment, as a high priest, the chol mitzvahs kahuna gedela alav, he has to keep all the mitzvahs of the high priest. He no longer serves in the position of high priest, but he must keep all the mitzvahs. If he ever does serve again in the capacity of high priest, that's fine. And if the first high priest dies, the second one can also go in right away in his place. Since he served once as a high priest, he should be the first in line to take him over when the first one dies. Halacha Daled, another thing which happens during this week before Yom Kippur. During these 7 days, mazin alav me'efer hapara. They would sprinkle on the high priest from the ashes of the para aduma. B'shlishi lehafrashasai u'bishvi sho'erav Yom Kippurim. The third and seventh day of a separation, seventh meaning the day before Yom Kippur. Shema nitma b'meis v'le'ada, just in case he became impure through ritual corpse impurity, which requires the para aduma treatment, as we'll learn at length in the Rambam's 10th book. And just in case, we sprinkle it upon him. However, if the third or seventh day coincided with Shabbos, that would override the sprinkling. Since the whole sprinkling is out of doubt, it doesn't override Shabbos. So if the proper day for sprinkling is on Shabbos, you just don't sprinkle.
He gets at least one.
Huh? But he'll get at least one, exactly. Halacha hey, additionally, kol shiva sayamim margilin oisei ba'avodas. For all 7 days, they would train him. They would get him accustomed to doing the service. Now, obviously, he was around the whole time, the whole year, but he didn't always serve. Right? There was always the daily rotation. If he wanted to, he could serve. But let's say he was unfamiliar. Let's say he just stepped into office a month ago. So they would train him for all 7 days. And they would have him do things throughout the regular daily service just to get used to it. Zaydek Sadam, he'd sprinkle the blood. Umakter Saktoides, offer the incense. Umeter Vesaneides, light the candles of the menorah. Umakter Evrei Tamid al Hamizbeach, and he would offer the limbs of the daily sacrifice in the Mizbeach. Kadeshi Yeragel Ba'avodah B'Yom Kippurim, so he should be in the habit, well accustomed to the service on Yom Kippur itself. They would also hand off to him elders from the elders of the court, the most important judges. The Kodim Lefanav, they would read the Torah before him, the portion that describes the service of Yom Kippur. And they would teach him the service of the day, the order of the day. And they would actually tell him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master, the high priest, Kra ata beficha, don't just listen to us. Read it with your mouth. Shema shachachta, maybe you forgot since last year. Or maybe this is your first time doing it. You never learned about this yet. So don't just listen to the shir. You have to also read it with your mouth. Read the Torah words so that it becomes part of you and you remember it. And then, ve'erev Yom Kippurim b'shachris, in the morning of the day before Yom Kippur, hayuma midin oisei b'shari mizrach, or hamizrach. They would have him stand at the eastern gate of the temple courtyard. Uma'avirin lefanav parim ve'elim ukvasim. They would have pass before him bulls, rams, sheep, kadeshi makir v'ragel ba'avodah, so he should be used to it. I mean, familiar with what's going on.
You get mixed up with a goat.
Exactly. You don't know what's what. Okay. I don't know what's what. You put before me a sheep, a lamb, a ram, so they would put it before him and they would have it go. By the way, the Talmud asks, how come there's no goats here? We just learned before that goats are part of the service. How come they didn't pass any goats?
The two twin goats.
Huh? Yeah. So why didn't they bring them? So the Gemara says because the goat was brought for a sin offering, and we don't want to arouse any type of sin on the day before Yom Kippur. So we tell them about the goats, but we don't have only the bulls, the sheep, and the ram are the ones that that go there. Even though one of the bulls is also a sin offering, the Gemara asks that, but basically answers that the bull was really brought on behalf of the Kohen Gadol himself, so it wouldn't arouse unpleasant things for the entire Jewish people. But the goat was for the entire Jewish people, so you didn't bring it there. Halacha Vav, another halacha for the Kohen Gadol. Kol Shivas Hayamim, all 7 days of preparation. Lo hayu meinin mimenu machal umashke. They wouldn't withhold food and drink. Eat whatever you want, drink whatever you want. There's no diet. Erev Yom Hakippurim im chashecha, but on the day before Yom Kippur, as it was getting dark, lo hayu manichin oisei lechol harbe. They wouldn't let him eat a lot. Sha'amachal mevi es hashina, because eating makes you sleepy. And as we're going to see in a moment, v'lo hayu manichin oisei lishain. They wouldn't let him sleep the night of Yom Kippur, Shema Yireh Keri, maybe lest he have a nocturnal emission. So they would keep him up all night, and then he had to be up all day for the service. So they couldn't let him eat before, because then he'd be tired. Even what they did let him eat, they wouldn't let him eat things that could enhance the sperm. Like eggs or hot milk, things like that. We don't want to encourage any, even on the bodily part, anything which could lead to an emission. And so, no eating a lot, and even what would eat would be restricted. Now that Rambam says a very important ceremony that used to happen just before Yom Kippur, and this is a very sad part of Jewish history, that Bimei Bayis Sheni, in the days of the Second Temple, Tzotz Haminus B'Yisrael, heresy began to sprout among the Jewish people who didn't believe in the oral Torah. V'yotzu hatzdukin meheira yevedu, she'enan ma'aminin b'teira shebal peh. And the Sadducees emerged. They should be destroyed quickly, says the Rambam. They don't believe in the oral tradition. The Hayu Oimrim, they used to say, Shekteira shel Yom Hakippurim, that the incense of Yom Kippur, the holiest service of the year, they had a misinterpretation of it. They would say that the incense of Yom Kippur, manichin oisa al ha'esh ba'heichol chutz lapareiches. You need to pour the incense over the coals, over the fire, in the heichal, which is the outer part of the holy structure, outside the curtain. Ukesheyale ashana machnis oisa lifnim lakedosh hakadashim. Once the smoke rises, then you bring it into the Holy of Holies. Hatam, and what was their reason? Because they would say, Zesha Kasuv B'Torah, when it says in the Torah, Ki be'onon eirae ala kapeiras, Hashem said, I'm going to appear in a cloud above the covering of the Holy Ark. They explained that to mean, Amru ki hu anan haktoiras. They explained that it's the cloud of the incense. So instead, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell Aaron, that when he comes into the Holy of Holies, I'm going to be seen with a cloud. Which means, according to their misinterpretation, that by the time he walks in, there has to already be a cloud. And therefore, the incense, which was the powder, had to be poured onto the coals and already create the cloud before he walks in. Now that's not our tradition. From directly from Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai, the sages have learned, generation to generation, that the incense was actually placed on the coals in the Holy of Holies. You see here, we'll explore in detail later, but he would walk in with two tools. He would walk in with a pan full of coals, and in the left hand was a spoon or a little bowl full of the incense. Then he would come inside the Kodesh HaKodashim, place down the pan on the floor, and then pour the incense into the pan. So he makes the cloud in the Holy of Holies. That's how we have the tradition. Shenemar, as it says, V'nasan haktoides al ha'esh lifnei Hashem. Or V'nasan es haktoides. The high priest needs to put the incense on the fire while he's in front of Hashem. Now, could you imagine? You have a dispute about the holiest service of the year. And we all know that in the Second Temple times, things kind of a little bit degenerated, and not all the high priests were of the most righteous stature. But the court definitely was upholding the standards. So they had to make sure that we're not dealing with a Sadducee, undercover Sadducee, who's going to go into the temple while nobody's watching, because there was full trust here. Nobody can see what he was doing. Right. We have to be sure that he's on our side of authentic orthodoxy, not the heretical tzedukkim. So therefore there was a special ceremony that was done. Because there was a suspicion in Second Temple times that maybe the high priest is a little leaning towards heresy, so the court would put him through an oath on the day before Yom Kippur. They would say to him, with respect, because he didn't know, they would say, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master, the high priest. Anu shluchei beis din. We are agents of the court. Ve'ata shlucheinu ushliach beis din. And you are acting on behalf of us. You're our agent and the agent of the court. So we need you to be perfect here. Mashbi'in anu alecha. We place an oath upon you. B'misha shikein es shmoi babayis hazeh. In the name of the one, meaning Hashem, who has allowed his name to dwell in this house. Shaloi teshane davar she'amarnu lach. That you shall not change anything that we told you. Promise that you're going to go exactly in the order as we have received it. And he would swear. V'hu peiresh u'boicha. And then what would usually happen was the Kohen Gadol would turn away and cry. Al shechashduhu b'minus. For the fact that they even suspected him of being a heretic. V'hein peiresh u'boichin. And the court would also turn away and cry. L'fi shechashdu l'mi shemasav shtumin. Because they had to suspect somebody whose deeds are unknown. Shemayin b'li by klum. What's the reason to suspect? Maybe he has nothing in his heart. Maybe he's a regular good guy. And so they would cry just for that. The Rabbi once explained how this, just shows you how much Avos Yisrael is. Like, the high priest cried, I understand. The Talmud says, you never have suspicion thrown over you about something unless you have something related to it. Even if you're innocent, the fact that somebody is spreading a rumor about you means that there's something you have to look into in your behavior. So for the high priest himself, if he was suspect of this, that means his character wasn't stellar. And so something is lacking. It's a reason to cry. But why should the agents of the court? Why should they cry? They're literally doing what they have to be doing.
The reason is what the Kohen Gadol is crying. Because they inadvertently accusing him of possibly.
Exactly.
And they completely.
Exactly. That is the extent of Avos Yisrael of the court. Just the fact that they had to accuse another Jew. When you don't know what it is, it touched their heart so deeply that it brought them to tears. And the Rebbe said, look at this is Erev Yom Kippur. What's everyone doing? It's the holiest day, preparing for the holiest day, preparing for the service in the temple. And on the hearts of the high court is their ultimate Avos Yisrael. Even if they just point the finger at another Jew, they take it so hard that they would cry. Tells us about how we have to treat other Jews. Even if you suspect somebody, even if you want to cast a doubt over somebody, you really have to do it with sensitivity because you don't know. Maybe it's just completely nothing. And you can cast irretrievable harm. So that's as they went into Yom Kippur. And then the night of Yom Kippur itself says that Rambam Malachaches, Kol Leila Yom Hakippurim, the entire night of Yom Kippur, there was no actual service going on. Kohen Gadol Yeshe V'Doirish, Im Hayachacham. If the high priest was a wise man, well versed in the Torah, he would sit and give a class. He would expound on the Torah related to Yom Kippur to all the Jews that were there. Many Jews came to witness the service, so they would gather at night and he would give a shir. Talmud, if he wasn't the wise man who can lecture, he was a student. Dershim Lefanov, other sages would give a class while he listened. If he was expert in reading scripture, he would read. If not, they would read for him. All this so you shouldn't sleep. What would they read? The holy writings. They're more interesting, stimulating. They keep the mind awake and the body awake. If he wanted to doze off, he gets tired. The young Levites would snap at him with their snapping finger, the middle finger. Right? I remember they would say, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master, the high priest, he can't sleep. Amoid, maybe stand up. V'hitstanin ma'at ala ritzpa, cool off on the floor. Because they were barefoot, right? It's stone floor. So it was cold. Stand on the stone floor, cool off, it'll wake you up. Kadesh Leitishan so you don't fall asleep. And we just keep dealing with him and we keep him awake ad shemagi azman shchita till the time of the slaughtering of the daily sacrifice arrives. And Yom Kippur, they'd be very careful. They would never slaughter till it was clear that the dawn had risen, for sure. Shema yishchatu balayla, because they might slaughter at night. You think about it, it's Yom Kippur, you're up all night, a little bit confused. They would wait a little bit extra till it was for sure dawn, and then they would begin the service, which we'll describe tomorrow and the next day going forward.